date is August 15, 1953. A suffocating, dark summer night in Tehran. In a secret basement of the American embassy, a man sits with a glass of whiskey. On the record player, "Luck Be a Lady Tonight" from the famous Broadway musical Guys and Dolls is playing. This man is no ordinary diplomat. He is the grandson of U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt, the CIA's Middle East chief, Kermit Roosevelt. And that night, in that basement, he is gambling with the fate of an entire nation. He is waiting for just one thing: news of victory or death coming from the streets. What no one predicted was this: what was planned that night in that basement would forever change the course, not just of Iran, but of the entire Middle East and even the world. Hello friends, welcome to today's episode. I'm your host. Today, we're going to talk about one of history's greatest honor struggles, the epic of Iran's oil nationalization and the dark 1953 coup against Mossadegh. If you're ready, put on your headphones, because we're diving into a story that rivals any Hollywood movie. Let's dig a little deeper. Why oil? Why Iran? Here's the thing. We need to go back to the early 20th century, to 1901. At that time, Iran was ruled by Mozaffar ad-Din Shah, a leader described as an old child addicted to Western luxury. A British millionaire named William Knox D'Arcy gave the Shah £20,000 in cash, and in return, he secured a 60-year oil concession over an area of Iran larger than Texas and California combined. Only 16% of the profits would stay in Iran. Don't be surprised, but the Shah had no idea that by signing this agreement, he was essentially selling his country's rope. In 1908, the first oil gushed out, and soon after, as World War I approached, the British government, at Winston Churchill's insistence, bought 51% of the company. That's how the famous Anglo-Iranian Oil Company was born. Now let's look behind the curtain. This company grew into a giant over the years. The world's largest refinery was built at Abadan. But it's not as simple as it seems. While the immense wealth from Iranian oil financed the British Empire, the condition of the Iranian workers who extracted that oil was miserable. As Manoucher Farman, the head of the Iranian Oil Institute in Abadan, recounts in his memoirs, British managers sat in their air-conditioned offices and played tennis in their rose garden clubs, while tens of thousands of Iranian workers lived in makeshift shantytowns made of tin and mud brick, with no water or electricity, overrun with rats. British salaries were astronomical. Iranians were below the hunger line. A witness once said, "When we asked the British why they treated their workers like this, they told us, 'Socialism is fine in our own country, but here we must be the masters.' In my opinion, that is the most disgusting and clear summary of colonialism. This system of exploitation planted a seed of anger in the hearts of Iranians that grew larger every day. So where was Iranian politics while all this was happening? The Iranian parliament was tearing itself apart trying to fix this inequality. We're talking about a picture where in 1948, the British made a net profit of £61 million, paid £28 million in taxes to the British Treasury, but gave Iran only £9 million. Then things got complicated. In the early 1950s, a leader unlike any seen before emerged on the scene, Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh. He came from an aristocratic family, studied law in Europe, was known for his honesty, and was fanatically devoted to constitutional rights. Physically weak, old, often sick and running meetings from his bed in his pajamas. But the moment he stepped to the podium, he turned into a lion. A orator mesmerized the public with his tears, fainting spells, and dramatic outbursts. For Mossadegh, oil was not just an economic issue. He saw it as a war for independence and honor. Right at that moment, while the British tried to stall Iran with small concessions, America and Saudi Arabia signed the Aramco agreement with a 50-50 profit split. When the Iranians said, "We want the same," the British oil company arrogantly replied, "Not a single penny more." At that point, things spiraled out of control. Mossadegh's National Front declared, "Fine, we'll nationalize our oil," and pushed the historic law through Parliament. On May 1, 1951, Mossadegh became prime minister, and Iranian oil now belonged entirely to Iran. A festival atmosphere swept the streets of Iran. People entered the Abadan refinery and tore down the signs. The old colonial order seemed to have collapsed. But would the British give up? The expected didn't happen. Winston Churchill and the British government made this a matter of honor. They immediately sent the Navy to the Persian Gulf. They threatened every oil company in the world and imposed a massive embargo on Iran. Wait a second, you'll ask? How did the embargo work? The British decided to stop, like pirates, any ship carrying Iranian oil in international waters. When an Italian tanker named Rosemary tried its luck, the British Navy seized it. Suddenly, no one could take Iranian oil, and suddenly, everyone's faces fell. Iran's economy began to bleed like a patient whose veins had been cut. Millions of dollars in revenue dropped to zero. Unemployment and inflation skyrocketed. Mossadegh's War of Honor was slowly turning into a massive economic crisis and chaos sweeping the country. We have to talk about this factor, diplomacy breaking down. The British took the issue to the UN Security Council. Mossadegh, despite his illness, went to New York in October 1951. His speech there was magnificent. He became the voice of the weak and exploited nations. In response to the British delegate Gladwin Jeff's arrogant remark that Iranians do not have the intelligence to run this refinery, Mossadegh tore into international law and British imperialism. He created such a storm that the UN and later the International Court of Justice rejected British demands. Time magazine named him Man of the Year. By the way, a quick note, the Americans were not as rigid as the British at first. President Truman and his special envoy Averell Harriman came to Iran trying to reconcile the two sides. Harriman tried to convince Mossadegh, warning him that they didn't have the experts to run the refinery. But Mossadegh was clear. The British will never set foot in this country again. What Harriman said, your economy will collapse. You'll have no money. Mossadegh gave his famous and tragic reply, tant pis pour nous, so much the worse for us. We'll manage. He was ready to pay any price for independence. Now let's get to the real issue. Why did America switch sides? The U.S. had presidential elections and Dwight Eisenhower came to power. With the Eisenhower era, Cold War paranoia in Washington reached its peak. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and CIA Director Allen Dulles saw the world in black and white. British agents, notably the famous Christopher Woodhouse, went to Washington and hit the Americans where they were weakest. They said, Mossadegh is not just about oil, because of his stubbornness. He is pushing his country into the arms of communism, into the Soviets. The two-day Iranian Communist Party is gaining strength. Chia's secret reports show that the Soviets didn't really have the luxury or a plan to stage a coup in Iran at that time. Even Moscow didn't trust Mossadegh. But the British succeeded in scaring the Americans. They said if Iran falls, the whole Middle East falls. In that moment, everything changed. The Dulles brothers and Eisenhower approved the plan to overthrow Mossadegh. The code name, Ajax, Operation Ajax. The man in charge, Kermit Roosevelt, whom I mentioned at the beginning. Let's also look at it this way. When the CIA arrived in Iran, they didn't build something from scratch. They took over local networks that the British had been funding for years, networks that bribed politicians, mullahs, journalists, and street thugs like the Rashidian brothers. Kermit Roosevelt had hundreds of thousands of dollars at his disposal to distribute among Tehran's gangs. Politicians, journalists bought with money declared Mossadegh an enemy of religion and a communist, while religious leaders incited the people against him. Even Ayatollah Khashoggi, who had once supported Mossadegh, switched sides. By August 1953, it was hard even to breathe in Tehran. The streets were churning with two-day and nationalist protests, while Chia agents created chaos by handing out money in dark corners. Roosevelt's plan was simple. The Shah would sign a decree dismissing Mossadegh and appointing General Fazlollah Zahedi in his place. If Mossadegh resisted, bought-off officers and street gangs would step in. Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was a cowardly, indecisive man. He resisted for days, but finally, under Chia threats and pressure, he signed the decree and fled to his palace on the Caspian Sea coast. On the night of August 15, Colonel Nassari went to deliver the decree to Mossadegh and arrest him. But it's not as simple as it seems. Mossadegh's intelligence was solid. When Colonel Nassari arrived at the door, Mossadegh's loyal soldiers were waiting for him. They expected didn't happen. The coup colonel was immediately arrested. The coup had failed. As soon as the Shah heard the news, he fled by private plane first to Baghdad, then to Rome. Mossadegh went on the radio and told the people, "A foreign plot has been crushed." That morning, everyone in Washington was in shock. An urgent telegram was sent from Shah headquarters to Kermit Roosevelt. Operation failed. Leave Iran immediately. But Roosevelt didn't leave, he persisted. He photocopied the fake decrees he had and distributed them to journalists in Tehran. The Shah's escape had energized the nationalists and leftists. Statues were being toppled in the streets, and people were shouting, "We want a republic." At that critical moment, Mossadegh made a huge mistake. Thinking the street was out of control, he ordered the police and army to forcefully suppress the protests. He sent his own supporters home. The square was left to the gangs that Shia had paid. Wednesday morning, August 19, led by a gang leader known as Shaban Shaban the brainless, weightlifters, wrestlers, and thugs, carrying clubs, began marching from the south to the city center shouting, "Long live the Shah!" The interesting part is that the people Mossadegh had kept at home couldn't stand up to them. And then the real coup came. Pro-American officers in the army brought their tanks into the streets. Instead of stopping the protesters, they joined them. Then things completely fell under the control of the soldiers. Sherman tanks surrounded Mossadegh's house. An artillery duel began that lasted for hours. The area around the house became a bloodbath. About 300 people lost their lives. By evening, the house was destroyed. Mossadegh had to flee by jumping over a wall to a neighbor's house in his pajamas. But the next day he surrendered to General Zahedi's men. We must not forget this quote. A British agent later said, "We just struck the spark. The forest was already dry." They were partly right. Mossadegh's intransigence had prepared his own end. But without the dollars that struck the spark, things would never have come to this point. The Shah, who had been nervously biting his nails in a hotel room in Rome, couldn't believe his ears when he heard the coup had succeeded. He returned to his country in triumph and offered his gratitude to the Americans who had put him back on the throne. Then what happened? The oil for which Iran had fought a war of honor for years was transferred to a consortium established in 1954. The British got 40%, the Americans 40%, and others the rest. Mossadegh was tried in a military court for treason. Although he continued to roar like a lion in court, he was sentenced to house arrest in his own village for the rest of his life. The Shah, with American support and his terrifying secret police Savak, established an iron-fisted dictatorship that would last 25 years. In conclusion, friends, the 1953 coup was not just the overthrow of a government. It was the murder of the Iranian people's belief in democracy and the West. As that Iranian woman the author met years later at a cocktail party said, "Why did you Americans do this terrible thing? We loved you. If you hadn't staged this coup, you would never have experienced the 1979 embassy hostage crisis." Historian Irvan Abrahamian says that this coup is the real origin of the endless anti-Americanism in the Middle East today. With the overthrow of Mossadegh, that hopeful democratic dream gave way to decades of mistrust and, ultimately, the 1917 Islamic Revolution. This painful story of a nation struggling for self-determination, showing how it was pawned on the chessboard of great powers, I hope serves as a lesson to all of us on how we should read the world. Take care of yourselves, and see you in the next episode with a brand new story. Goodbye.